Dr. Michael Hayes had been staring at anomalous readings for 3 hours when the coffee mug slipped from his trembling fingers. The ceramic shattered against the reinforced plasteel deck of Deep Sea Station Theta, but he barely registered the sound. His eyes were fixed on the massive floodlights piercing the abyssal darkness outside the observation dome, illuminating something that couldn't, exist. "Running scan iteration 17, announced Dr. Sarah Williams, her dark fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "Mike, these readings make no sense. It's like time itself is wrinkled around that thing." 3,000 meters below the Pacific Ocean's surface, surrounded by the crushing pressure of the deep, lay the unmistakable silhouette of an aircraft carrier. Not just any carrier. The U.S. Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, reported lost with all hands in 2025. The massive vessel rested in a peculiar shimmer of bent light, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, but underwater and perfectly geometric. "Get me Admiral Chen," Hayes managed to croak out. Now, Williams was already ahead of him, but before she could establish the connection, the station's emergency broadcast system crackled to life. The holographic display shifted to show footage from the Titan colonies, massive Drachnid warships, their crystalline hulls gleaming with malevolent purpose, systematically destroying humanity's outer defensive line. "Breaking news from the Titan Defense Force." The announcer's voice was tight with controlled panic. "The Drachnid Empire's 3rd attack wing has broken through the Wellington line. Civilian evacuations are underway. 40% of the defense fleet has been confirmed lost." Hayes tuned out the rest, his mind racing. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. "Sarah, focus the quantum resonance scanner on the temporal distortion field. I need to know if—" "Life signs," she interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. "Mike, I'm reading over 5,000 life signs aboard. Temporal stasis signatures. They're alive. The whole crew is alive." The observation dome's lights flickered as another scan pulse washed over the ancient vessel. Hayes pressed his palm against the transparent aluminum, trying to process what he was seeing. The Ford was perfectly preserved, its massive flight deck still bearing the scars of its final battle. According to historical records, the carrier had disappeared during a classified operation in the Philippine Sea, taking with it one of the most experienced crew complements in the U.S. Navy. "Connection established with Pacific Command," the station's AI announced. "Admiral Chen is waiting." Hayes squared his shoulders before the holographic projector. The Admiral's weathered face materialized, lines of exhaustion evident even through the flickering connection. "Dr. Hayes, this had better be important. We're losing ships by the hour up here." "Ma'am, we found something that could change everything." Hayes gestured, sharing their sensor feeds. "The Ford, Admiral. We found the Ford, and her crew is alive." The silence that followed was deafening. Admiral Chen's expression shifted from irritation to disbelief, then to something Hayes hadn't seen on any senior officer's face since the war began. "Hope. Confirm those life signs," she ordered, her voice sharp. "And get me everything you can on that temporal field. I'm dispatching the recovery fleet to your coordinates. If there's even a chance." She paused, watching another holographic display showing the continuing devastation above Titan. "We've spent 4 centuries advancing our technology, Doctor, and the Drachnids are still beating us. Maybe what we need isn't something new. Maybe we need to remember something old." As if in answer, the Ford's massive hull creaked in its temporal cradle, steel groaning against the weight of centuries. Deep in the abyssal plain, humanity had just discovered its past, and possibly its future. "Hold position, maintain surveillance, and don't do anything to disrupt that stasis field," Chen commanded. "I'll be there in 3 hours. Whatever cosmic coincidence brought us this gift, we're damn well going to use it." Hayes nodded, but his eyes were drawn back to the carrier. Through the shimmering temporal distortion, he could swear he saw lights flickering in the bridge, as if the crew of the Ford knew their long wait was finally over. Commander Jessica Iron Maxwell fought to keep her hand steady as she faced the Earth Defense Council. The circular chamber, designed to inspire awe with its hovering seats and holographic displays, felt more like a tomb today. Above them, a real-time strategic display showed humanity's retreating forces in red, Drachnid advances in purple. With all due respect, Counselor Zhang's voice tricked with skepticism, "You're suggesting we pin our hopes on a relic. Our most advanced stellar carriers are being torn apart by Drachnid forces, and you want to deploy something that belonged in a museum before first contact." Maxwell keyed a sequence into her neural interface. The chamber's holographic system flickered, replacing the strategic display with recovered footage from the Ford's combat records. The council chamber filled with the sights and sounds of the carrier's last known engagement. "Watch," Maxwell commanded. "Really watch." The footage showed a ballet of coordinated warfare that made several counselors lean forward. F-35s and carrier-launched drones executed complex, interwoven attack patterns. Electronic warfare suites disrupted enemy targeting systems. The carrier itself performed maneuvers that seemed to defy its massive size, its battle group moving like extensions of a single organism. "In 3 months, we've lost 40% of our fleet," Maxwell continued, letting the footage play. "You know why? Because we fight like machines. Predictable. Programmable." She gestured to the historic footage. "They fought like warriors. Creative. Adaptive. Unpredictable." Admiral Chen, standing silently until now, stepped forward. The Ford's crew successfully engaged 5 enemy carrier groups in their final recorded battle. Using technology we consider primitive, they achieved victory through superior tactics and coordination. "That was against human opponents," Counselor Drake interrupted. "The Drachnids are different. Their neural networks process combat situations thousands of times faster than. And that's exactly their weakness," Maxwell cut in. She switched the display to footage from last week's devastating loss at Titan. "Look at their attack patterns. Perfect, precise, and completely inflexible. They've never adapted because they've never needed to. Until now." The chamber fell silent as Maxwell overlaid the Ford's combat patterns with recent Drachnid tactical displays. The contrast was stark. One showed the rigid perfection of machines, the other the fluid unpredictability of human intuition. "The Ford's crew comes from an era when electronic warfare meant more than just cyber attacks," she continued. "They knew how to fight when communications were disrupted, when they couldn't rely on perfect information. Their entire doctrine was built around chaos and adaptation." Admiral Chen activated her own neural interface, bringing up the medical scans of the Ford's crew in stasis. 5,000 experienced naval personnel, preserved at their peak. A command staff that invented half the tactics we've forgotten. And they're ready to wake up. If, Counselor Zhang emphasized, the stasis field holds. If we can safely revive them. If they can adapt to our technology. If. A proximity alarm cut through the chamber. The strategic display automatically reactivated, showing a new Drachnid fleet emerging from faster-than-light travel near Mars. "We don't have time for ifs." Maxwell's voice hardened. "The Drachnids are learning our patterns, predicting our responses. We need something they can't predict. We need the Ford." Council President Richards stood, his aged face grave. "The risks are enormous, but our alternatives are worse." He surveyed the room. All in favor. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Maxwell felt a weight lift from her shoulders, only to be replaced by an even heavier one. Now she had to wake up a crew from nearly 5 centuries ago and convince them to fight a war among the stars. "Commander Maxwell," Richards called as the council dispersed. "This operation is yours. Choose your support team carefully. And..." He paused, looking at the still-playing footage of the Ford in action. "Pray that our ancestors are as good as you believe they were." Maxwell nodded, already mentally preparing for the challenges ahead. They fought world wars with propeller planes and emerged with jet fighters, she said quietly. They went from biplanes to spaceflight in 60 years. If any group of humans can adapt to this fight, it's them. She hoped she was right. Humanity's survival might depend on it. Captain Jack Morrison's first breath in 462 years tasted like copper and ozone. His eyes struggled to focus on the strange lights above him, his mind reeling from the temporal shock. The last thing he remembered was giving the order to engage the experimental defense system as 5 Chinese carrier groups closed in. "Now, Captain Morrison," a woman's voice called. "I'm Commander Maxwell. Welcome to 2487. He tried to sit up, fighting against muscles stiff from centuries of stasis. The medical bay looked wrong. Too sleek, too pristine. Through a massive window, he could see Earth from orbit, its continents altered by centuries of climate change and engineering. "My crew." His voice was hoarse but steady. "Awakening in sequence, sir. Medical AI systems are monitoring their recovery." Maxwell helped him to his feet. "We need to brief you on the situation." The next hour was a crash course in humanity's greatest crisis. Morrison watched holographic displays of Drachnid warships tearing through human fleets, his trained eye noting their formations and tactics. His crew filtered in during the briefing. XO Sarah Cooper, CAG Thomas Wolf Rivers, Chief Engineer Marcus Sparks Peterson, each looking as disoriented as he felt. "So let me get this straight," Rivers interrupted during a demonstration of modern fighter operations. "You've got faster-than-light travel, energy shields, and AI systems, but you don't know how to run a proper combat air patrol." Maxwell bristled. "Our combat doctrine is highly evolved." "Your combat doctrine is chess," Morrison cut in, standing up despite the medical eye's protests. "Beautiful, precise, predictable chess." He gestured to the holographic display. "Show me your last major engagement again." The scene played out, human ships in perfect defensive formations, Drachnid vessels advancing in equally perfect attack patterns, both sides launching fighters in carefully calculated waves. "Computer," Morrison called out, still uncomfortable with speaking to air. "Overlay forward tactical data from the Philippine Sea engagement, March 2025. The difference was stark. Where modern ships moved in rigid formations, the Ford's battle group flowed like water. Fighter squadrons split and reformed unpredictably. Electronic warfare suites created confusion and chaos, and the carrier itself seemed to dance through the chaos it created. "You've got better technology," Morrison observed, "but you're fighting like machines. We fought like humans." Chief Peterson had been quiet, studying the technical readout of modern electronic warfare systems. "Commander Maxwell, what frequencies do Drachnid sensors operate on?" "Quantum field detection, gravimetric analysis, neural pattern scanning." "But not radio, not radar?" Maxwell blinked. "Those technologies are centuries obsolete." Peterson grinned for the first time since waking. "They're not obsolete, ma'am. They're just forgotten." He turned to Morrison. "Captain, the Ford's old ECM suite might be invisible to their sensors. They've evolved so far past it, they don't even look for it anymore." Morrison nodded, memories of naval warfare flooding back. "Like using smoke screens against thermal imaging. Sometimes the primitive solution is the best solution." "If you think you can do better," Maxwell challenged, "bringing up a combat simulator, prove it." What followed was a 3-hour demonstration that left modern tactical officers speechless. Morrison's crew, using simulated versions of their obsolete systems, ran circles around modern combat protocols. They used techniques developed for Earth's oceans that translated perfectly to 3-dimensional space warfare. "That's impossible," one of Maxwell's tactical officers protested after the 5th simulation. "You violated 12 principles of modern space combat." "Principles," XO Cooper said with a dry smile, "are what you use when you run out of imagination." She pointed to the simulation results. "We just destroyed your carrier group using tactics from World War II. adapted on the fly. Imagine what we could do with your technology once we learn it. Morrison watched his crew adapting to neural interfaces and holographic controls with growing confidence. They were naval aviators and sailors, trained to adapt and overcome. The technology might be new, but the principles of warfare, the human elements, hadn't changed. Commander Maxwell, he turned to face her. I think it's time we showed these drachnids what they've been missing. Let's wake up my carrier. Maxwell nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Welcome to the future, Captain. Let's make it interesting. Chief Engineer Amanda Wrench Rodriguez stood in the Ford's catapult control room, arms crossed, facing down a team of future engineers who looked at her mechanical systems like they were stone tools. The argument had been going for hours. With all respect, Chief, Dr. Victor Petrov insisted, his neural implants glowing with frustration. Electromagnetic catapults are centuries behind our mass drivers. The energy efficiency alone. Launch the test drone. Rodriguez interrupted. Your way first. The massive orbital dock housing the Ford hummed as the modern mass driver activated. On the holographic display, they watched the drone accelerate smoothly along the quantum guidance path, reaching launch velocity in 2.3 seconds. Impressive, Rodriguez admitted. Now reset and load another drone on my cat. The future engineers exchanged skeptical glances. They'd spent weeks modifying the Ford's electromagnetic catapult system for vacuum operations, mostly to humor the ancient crew. Now Rodriguez was going to demonstrate just how outdated her technology was. Launching in 3, 2, 1. The catapult fired. Jaws dropped. The drone accelerated faster than the mass driver launch, reaching velocity in 1.8 seconds. More importantly, it did so while consuming 30% less power. How? Petrov demanded, neural implants frantically analyzing the data. The principles of physics haven't changed. Rodriguez allowed herself a small smile. No, but sometimes simpler is better. Your mass drivers work by creating a perfect quantum field. Beautiful technology, but it requires enormous power. We just throw the hell out of things with magnets. She pulled up the schematics she'd been working on. The real breakthrough came when we combined our old systems with your modern materials. The Ford's catapults were built to compensate for atmospheric resistance. In vacuum, with your superconductors, she shrugged. Well, you saw the results. Across the carrier, similar scenes were playing out. In the Combat Information Center, Captain Morrison's crew was discovering that their primitive radar and radio systems created a ghost field that modern drachnid sensors couldn't penetrate. Their electronic warfare suite, designed to jam frequencies no one used anymore, slipped through gaps in modern electronic defenses like they weren't even there. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, Commander Maxwell observed, watching the integration tests, only to discover your enemy has forgotten knives exist and doesn't wear stab-proof armor anymore. The real excitement came when Rodriguez's team started adapting the Ford's anti-missile systems. The old close-in weapon system, CIWS, designed to track and destroy incoming missiles with radar-guided rotary cannons, proved devastatingly effective against modern energy torpedoes. The physical projectiles simply ignored the energy shields designed to deflect plasma weapons. Think about it, Rodriguez explained to a stunned audience in the engineering briefing. Your defenses evolved to stop energy weapons and quantum torpedoes, but a chunk of depleted uranium moving at relativistic speeds. That's just rock throwing with style. Not everything was perfect. The hull needed reinforcement to handle space operations. The nuclear reactors required modern containment fields. But with each challenge, the synthesis of old and new technology produced unexpected advantages. The drachnids won't know what hit them, Petrov admitted, finally won over. Their combat systems are designed to counter modern threats. He gestured at the hybrid systems they were creating. This is like bringing ancient magic to a science fight. Rodriguez was about to respond when alarms blared throughout the dock. A holographic display showed a drachnid scout force had jumped into the outer system. They're scanning for our shipyards, Maxwell reported, rushing into engineering. "We need 2 more weeks to finish the modifications." "They'll find us in 2 days," Petrov countered, his implants calculating search patterns. Rodriguez looked at her hybrid systems, then at the determined faces of her combined engineering team, past and future working together. "Give me 48 hours, she declared. "We don't need to be pretty. We just need to be mean." As her team scrambled to action, Rodriguez ran her hand along one of the Ford's original catapults. The old girl had been built to fight battles no one could have imagined in 2025. Now she was about to show the galaxy that sometimes the best way forward is to remember what worked in the past. "Time to earn your keep, old friend," she whispered to the carrier. "Let's show them what impossible really means." The gas giant's radiation belt crackled with electromagnetic storms, a celestial curtain perfect for hiding a carrier that shouldn't exist. On the Ford's bridge, Captain Morrison watched his crew operate with steady precision, centuries-old training adapting to their new reality. Drachnid Battle Group approaching optimal strike range. Lieutenant Sarah Cooper announced from her tactical station, her hands moving smoothly over holographic controls that would have seemed like magic a few months ago. 5 capital ships, 12 escorts. They're searching the shipyard sector by sector. Morrison nodded, studying the tactical display. The enemy fleet moved with mathematical precision, their search pattern a textbook example of modern space warfare doctrine. Perfect, predictable. "Status of our strike group?" he asked. "CAG Rivers reports all fighters showing ghost signatures," Cooper replied. "Old-school radar reflectors making them look like debris. ECM packages running silent. They're ready." Commander Maxwell stood at the back of the bridge, watching with a mix of anticipation and doubt. The Ford had completed its refit in 36 hours, not pretty, as Chief Rodriguez had promised, but functional. Now they would see if centuries-old carrier warfare could work in space. "Launch the strike," Morrison ordered. "Execute plan midway." The carrier's electromagnetic catapults fired in sequence, each launch masked by the radiation storm. Modern space fighters, modified with hybrid systems, accelerated into the void. But instead of forming up into the standard attack formations the Drachnids expected, they scattered like leaves in a storm. "Enemy fleet continuing standard search pattern," Cooper reported. "No indication they've detected our launches." Rivers' voice crackled over the comm, deliberately using old-fashioned radio frequencies. "Strike group approaching attack positions. They still think we're background radiation." Morrison allowed himself a small smile. The Drachnids had evolved beyond radio communication, beyond radar, beyond all the primitive technologies that had once ruled warfare. Their sensors searched for quantum signatures, gravimetric distortions, neural emissions, but not simple radio waves. "All fighters, execute attack plan," Morrison commanded. "Remind them why humanity ruled the seas." The strike came from 12 different vectors simultaneously. Fighters launched swarms of physically guided missiles, dumb weapons by modern standards, invisible to quantum detection systems. The first sign the Drachnids had that anything was wrong was when their flagship shields flared and died under impacts they couldn't detect. "Multiple direct hits," Cooper announced. Professional calm masking excitement. "Enemy fleet breaking formation. They're trying to establish a defensive sphere. Standard response protocol." "And that's their mistake," Morrison said. "Launch second wave. Target their predictable response positions." The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for generations. The Ford's hybrid fighters struck from impossible angles, using maneuvers developed for atmospheric combat that made no sense to AI prediction systems. Electronic warfare suites from 2025 threw Drachnid targeting into chaos while modern weapons found their marks through the confusion. "Enemy flagship is transmitting," Cooper reported, disbelief in her voice. "They're surrendering." The bridge fell silent. Through the tactical display, they watched the mighty Drachnid warships power down their weapons. Their perfectly ordered formation had been shattered by an enemy they couldn't understand. The flagship's commander, speaking through translation software, sounded almost offended. Your technology is inferior. Your tactics violate all established protocols. This victory should have been impossible. Morrison keyed the comm. That's humanity's secret, Commander. We don't believe in impossible. We just haven't figured out how to do it yet. As recovery operations began, Maxwell approached Morrison's chair. I've never seen anything like it. You turned space combat into naval aviation. No, Morrison corrected, watching his crews recover fighters using modified arresting gear. We just remembered that combat isn't about having the best technology. It's about using what you have better than the enemy uses what they have. The Drachnid surrender was transmitted across human space within hours. The footage of ancient carrier tactics defeating the galaxy's most advanced fleet became an instant morale boost for the battered human forces. But Morrison knew this was just the beginning. The Drachnids would adapt, would study this defeat. The real test would be teaching the rest of the fleet how to fight with this deadly combination of past and future. Set course for Earth, he ordered. We have a navy to rebuild. Again, Captain Morrison ordered, watching the holographic simulation reset. And this time, remember what I taught you about Halsey's tactical doctrine. The observation deck of the Ford had been converted into a floating war college. Modern fleet commanders, their neural implants glowing with concentration, ran through another carrier strike scenario. In the simulation, their ships moved with increasing fluidity, breaking away from the rigid formations that had cost humanity so many victories. Commander James Chen, youngest captain in the fleet, finally managed to execute a perfect carrier dive. A maneuver inspired by World War II dive bombers, adapted for three-dimensional space warfare. His simulated strike group hit the Drachnid formation from above their plane of movement, exploiting the enemy's two-dimensional tactical thinking. Better, Morrison nodded. You're starting to think like a predator instead of a programmer. Commander Maxwell stood at the tactical display, annotating the successful maneuver for future training sessions. It's not just the tactics, she observed. It's the whole mindset. We've been fighting like machines because we thought that was evolution. We forgot that evolution created sharks before it created computers. The Ford had become more than a warship. It was now the center of a tactical renaissance. In the hangar bay, Chief Rodriguez taught modern engineers how to maintain hybrid systems that combined electromagnetic catapults with quantum accelerators. In the CIC, Lieutenant Cooper trained tactical officers in the lost art of emissions control, showing them how to mask their ships using natural phenomena. Skills developed when submarines had to hide from satellites. The Drachnids have fought the same way for millennia, Morrison explained to his students. They evolved their technology, but stagnated their tactics. We're going to show them what they've been missing. The breakthrough came during a late-night strategy session. Captain Rivers, reviewing historical footage of submarine warfare, made the connection that would revolutionize space combat. Look at this. He highlighted a sequence showing World War I submarines using thermal layers to hide from sonar. Space has layers too. Radiation belts, magnetic fields, solar winds. We've been treating them as navigational hazards, when we should have been using them as cover, Maxwell finished, her implants quickly calculating the possibilities, just like the thermocline in the oceans. Morrison's crew brought centuries of naval warfare experience, carrier operations, submarine tactics, destroyer screening formations, and helped translate them into three-dimensional space combat. Modern captains learned to think like their ancestors, not in straight lines and perfect formations, but in cycles of predator and prey. The results were dramatic. In the next encounter with Drachnid forces, 3 human destroyers using modified World War I Wolfpack tactics destroyed a cruiser squadron without losing a ship. The enemy's perfect formations fell apart when faced with attacks that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. We're not just teaching them to fight, Morrison told Maxwell as they watched another group of officers run combat drills. We're teaching them to think differently about space itself. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some modern commanders resisted the change, claiming that reverting to primitive tactics was a step backward. The debate came to a head during a fleet commander's conference aboard the Ford. Admiral Harrison, a traditionalist, challenged Morrison publicly. These ancient tactics worked once because they were unexpected. The Drachnids will adapt. Of course they will, Morrison agreed, bringing up a tactical display. That's why we're not just teaching specific maneuvers. We're teaching adaptation itself. He highlighted successful engagements from the past month. Every one of these battles used different tactics. We're not giving them a pattern to adapt to. The conference room erupted in discussion as Morrison's point hit home. The strength of human military doctrine had never been its technology or its formations. It was the ability to evolve, to adapt, to surprise. As the Ford continued its mission as a floating academy, news arrived that vindicated Morrison's approach. The Drachnid Empire was recalling its fleet commanders for tactical reassessment. For the first time in their history, they were being forced to adapt. They're learning, Maxwell observed. Morrison watched his latest class of students practicing carrier maneuvers in the simulator. Good, he said with a predatory smile. Let's give them more to learn about. The Drachnid Second Fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 40 crystalline warships arranged in the sacred combat pattern their species had used for 10,000 years. Grand Admiral Kvex stood on his flagship's command deck, neural crystals pulsing with anticipation. The humans had gotten lucky once. Now they would learn the true might of an empire that spanned galaxies. He was about to make the biggest mistake in Drachnid military history. Enemy fleet detected. His tactical officer announced, "Standard human carrier group approaching from Sector 7. They're forming up for." The officer's voice trailed off as the human ships vanished from their quantum sensors. Aboard the Ford, Captain Morrison watched the Drachnid fleet's reaction. "They're still thinking in straight lines," he observed to Commander Maxwell. "Time to show them how we fought in the Pacific. All ships, execute Operation Coral Sea." The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for centuries. The human fleet moved like ocean predators, appearing and disappearing in the stellar debris field. Ships that should have been visible to the most advanced sensors in the galaxy seemed to fade into the background radiation, only to emerge firing from impossible angles. Impossible. Kvex raged as another of his cruisers reported critical damage. "Their technology is inferior. Their ships are decades behind ours." "Sir," his tactical officer's neural crystals flickered with confusion. "They're using radio waves and primitive electromagnetic weapons. Our systems aren't designed to." An explosion rocked the flagship as a volley of physically guided missiles, technology the Drachnids had abandoned centuries ago, struck through gaps in their energy shields. The missiles had been launched from fighters hiding in the magnetic wake of a gas giant, using centuries-old submarine tactics adapted for space warfare. "Break formation," Kvex ordered, abandoning the sacred combat patterns. "All ships, independent action." It was exactly what Morrison had been waiting for. "They're scattered. Launch operation midway." The Ford's hybrid catapults sang as they launched wave after wave of fighters. But instead of the coordinated strike the Drachnids expected, each fighter group seemed to operate independently, using attack patterns that made no tactical sense to their battle computers. "Sir," Cooper reported from her tactical station, "the enemy flagship is trying to re-establish formation using their standard protocols." Morrison nodded. "Just like we predicted. Transmit targeting data to Wolf Squadron. Let's show them why predictability kills." River's fighters struck the gathering Drachnid ships from 12 different vectors, simultaneously, their ancient electronic warfare suites creating phantom targets that scattered the enemy's fire. Modern weapons launched through the chaos of old-world tactical doctrine. When Kvex finally gave the surrender order, his neural crystals were dim with shock. His mighty Second Fleet had been reduced to scattered groups of damaged ships by tactics his species had dismissed as obsolete millennia ago. The Ford's transport shuttle docked with the Drachnid flagship for the formal surrender. Morrison, accompanied by Maxwell and Rivers, entered the crystalline command center. Kvex waited, his tall form rigid with barely contained rage and confusion. "How?" the Drachnid admiral demanded. "Our technology is superior in every way. Our tactics are perfected by 10,000 years of warfare." This should have been impossible. Morrison studied the alien commander, then pulled out an old-style tablet. He accessed Earth's historical database and brought up an image that made Maxwell smile. A pack of sharks hunting. "We didn't create these tactics," Morrison explained, showing Kvex the image. "Nature did. 4 billion years of evolution on Earth taught us that perfect formations make perfect targets. That adaptation beats perfection every time." The Drachnid admiral's neural crystals pulsed as he processed this. "Your species learns from primitive beasts. We learn from everything," Maxwell added. "That's what you never understood about humanity. We don't perfect one way of fighting. We collect them all." As the surrender terms were formalized, news of the Second Fleet's defeat spread across Drachnid space. For the first time in their history, the Empire faced an enemy that didn't fight according to any recognizable doctrine. An enemy that combined ancient wisdom with modern technology in ways their tactical computers couldn't predict. The war wasn't over, but its turning point had arrived. And it came not from some new technology, but from remembering old truths that space had forgotten. The peace treaty was signed not in some grand council chamber, but aboard the Ford's flight deck. Captain Morrison stood at attention, watching Drachnid and human representatives gather under the vast ceiling that had once held Earth's sky and now framed the stars themselves. The carrier's deck plates still bore scars from both centuries past and recent battles, each mark telling a story of humanity's evolution as a species. Chief Rodriguez had insisted on keeping them visible. "Every scar is a lesson learned," she'd said, and even the Drachnid engineers had come to appreciate the wisdom in that. "The official surrender document is ready, Captain," Commander Maxwell reported, her neural implants interfacing with the ceremonial datapad. She'd refused to have them removed, just as Morrison's crew had refused to completely modernize the Ford. The future wasn't about choosing between old and new. It was about learning from both. The Drachnid High Commander, Kvex, approached the signing table. His neural crystals pulsed with a new pattern their xenobiologists had never seen before, humility mixed with curiosity. "We could match your technology," Kvex stated, his translated words echoing across the deck. "But we could never match your heritage." He gestured to the carrier around them. "Your species fights with the wisdom of all your years, not just your latest advances. This is a truth we have forgotten." Morrison nodded, thinking of all the lessons the war had taught both sides. "The greatest technology any species can possess," he replied, "is the ability to learn from its past." The treaty terms were unprecedented. Instead of reparations or territory, the Drachnids requested an exchange of military history and doctrine. They wanted to understand how humanity had preserved its martial wisdom across centuries of advancement. In return, Drachnid quantum engineering would be shared, creating new hybrid technologies that combine the best of both civilizations. Already, Chief Rodriguez's engineering teams were working with Drachnid specialists to develop systems that no one would have imagined possible months ago. "The Ford will remain in active service," Morrison announced to the assembled crowd. "Not as a weapon of war, but as a living classroom. Her next mission is to explore the galaxy, carrying teachers instead of fighters, sharing the lessons of Earth's oceans with species who never knew them." The carrier's crew had made their choice too. Most opted to remain in 2487, becoming instructors at the newly established Temporal Naval Academy. Captain Rivers now taught aspiring pilots how to think in 3 dimensions using lessons learned from birds of prey. Lieutenant Cooper's tactical classes combined submarine warfare doctrine with quantum mechanics. "It's not just about military applications anymore," Maxwell told Morrison as they watched the ceremony conclude. "Other fields are starting to ask what else we forgot in our rush to advance. Meteorologists are rediscovering ancient weather prediction techniques. Doctors are finding old remedies that still have value. Morrison smiled, remembering his first moments after waking up in the future. Sometimes you have to look backward to move forward. The Ford's next mission would take her to the edges of known space, carrying a mixed crew of human and drachnid scholars. They would study how other species had evolved their military doctrine, adding new chapters to humanity's library of tactical wisdom. But more importantly, they would teach what humanity had finally learned, that true advancement comes not from abandoning the past, but from building upon it. As the ceremony concluded, Morrison took one last walk around his ship. In the CIC, holographic displays now shared space with old-style radar screens. The flight deck launched both quantum fighters and jets modified for space. Even the ship's AI had been programmed to understand ancient naval terminology. "Ready for our next deployment, Captain?" Maxwell asked, finding him in the observation deck, watching Earth orbit below. Morrison nodded, thinking of all the changes the past few months had brought. His crew had been awakened to fight a war, but they'd ended up teaching the future about its past. Now they would help forge a new age that honored both innovation and tradition. "You know what they're calling this era in the history books." Maxwell smiled. "The Renaissance of the Stars." "Good name," Morrison agreed. After all, the original Renaissance was about rediscovering old wisdom too. He turned to face the stars that waited for them. Let's see what else humanity forgot to remember. The Ford's engines hummed to life, ancient steel and modern quantum drives working in perfect harmony, carrying humanity's past into its future.